All right, this is Scott Christian with Fresh Ink. We're here with Kevin Putz, and we're going to be talking about his piece, And Legions Will Rise, which we're going to be performing on the first Fresh Ink concert, which is January 19th. Thanks, Kevin. This is great. And first of all, I have to just say thanks for writing the piece. I just think it's
My
just
pleasure.
an amazing piece of music, and it's been just such a joy to work on and rehearse, we're the whole group is really thrilled about being able to perform it and have the opportunity.
My pleasure. I only wish I could be there to hear it.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about it. This was a piece that you wrote for the marimba player uh, Makoto Nakura, and
That's right.
that's pretty close, I hope.
That's
Anyways, and this is as what I can tell, the fourth piece that you wrote for him.
Yeah, I'm not sure what number it was, but yeah, I met him in 1996 when I became the composer in residence of an organization called Young Concert Artists,
Right.
and Makoto was on their roster. I think he was the first marimbist ever to be a part of the Young Concert Artists roster, and so
Wow.
my first project, my first sort of task as composer in residence was to write him a solo marimba piece.
And that was Canyon.
And
Yeah.
Can't exactly. So
Yeah.
I got together with him and listened to him play. I didn't really know anything about the marimba,
Huh.
and hadn't written for it before. I'm a pianist
Right.
myself, and um, but he played me a lot of different things, literature, modern things, uh, Bach arrangements, things like that. And I went away and wrote this solo piece, and then he really liked it. He played it a lot,
Yeah.
and with the exception of one of the movements I wrote for six mallets, which
Oh, it didn't get
didn't
in
fly
there.
apparently. Yeah, I rewrote it for that was the third movement, and I just scrapped it and rewrote and wrote something else. But and then he commissioned another piece, but I think that maybe the second piece was the Marimba Concerto,
Right. Yeah, that was in
and then
'97, I think.
yeah, and then it could have been another one, but yeah, this trio he asked me to write. It's the kind of thing that I the musicians I was writing for were terrific. Makoto is, of course, amazing, and this violinist named Yayo Toda,
Uh huh.
and a clarinetist named Todd Palmer, all of them affiliated with Young Concert Artists. And
Okay.
the idea was that they were going to premiere this piece in Japan
Uh huh.
at in Kobe, which is Makoto's hometown.
Okay.
And the idea of marimba, clarinet, and violin, it's an unusual ensemble,
Yeah.
and so I think it sort of freaked me out. But
Huh.
um, when I really when you really think about it, when you start something like that, with an unusual instrumentation, it's very freeing for the imagination because you can just think about what these instruments could do well together.
Right.
And in fact, the first idea of the piece is the result of that kind of thinking, where, well, the violin can sustain very easily without having to breathe. It can just, be a sort of harmonic backdrop. It can sustain harmonics. The clarinet, because it can, of course, play melodies beautifully,
Yeah.
simple sort of, plaintive melodies. And the marimba can do lots of things, but the marimba is great at defining things, at just creating, clarity and definition. And so I thought, well, the marimba could set off set off the melodies in the clarinet while the violin just sort of played this very steady harmonic backdrop. So that was the first idea I had, but it was fun to write the piece because I just thought from beginning to end, what can these three instruments do well together?
Huh. That's interesting because in some liner notes, I think you said that you started this piece as kind of a showpiece, for the
Right.
marimba, and then you said that it became a piece that was all of a sudden now, equally virtuosic on all parts. How did that happen, and like maybe even how different do you think the piece would have been if it had been just a virtuosic piece for the marimba, or how did that
Well,
transpire?
it's interesting actually. Makoto, once I finished the piece, he thought that the ending wasn't dazzling enough for the marimba, and so I
Huh.
added a lot of music. There's actually I can't remember where it is, like what the rehearsal letter is, but
Right.
let's see. uh, anyway, there's a whole last section I think that begins with a D pedal in the
Yeah.
marimba, and then things get going again. That's
Right.
all new material. The piece originally ended right before that, and he just thought, no, this needs a bigger, more explosive ending.
Wow.
Um, and so that's one thing. But as far as the virtuosity of all three instruments, that just kind of happened. One of the things that I found that they could all do well is to play very rapid notes, like
Yeah.
this sort of almost Baroque music.
Right.
This kind
Right.
of just spinning, spinning kind of music.
Yeah.
The violin can do it well, either slurred or détaché without changing the bow, or with changing the bow every note. The clarinet can do it slurred, and the marimba can, of course, do it. And so that became an interesting texture toward the end,
Yeah.
where the three instruments do the same thing, either in unison and octaves, or at one point, which is a very, as you probably well know, a very difficult passage where they're playing in a canon
Right.
by an eighth note. I think an eighth note apart.
Yeah,
They're
we're
playing the
playing.
same music, the same very difficult 16th note passage, one eighth note apart. But it's a very interesting kind of thing that just sort of arose. Well, actually, these three could do that, the same thing together. I mean, you think of them as all very different instruments, but they actually could play the same music as well. And so it just led to all this virtuosity, this sort of ornamented kind of, not ornamented, but flashy kind of playing that just seemed to need to happen as the piece progressed, especially after the slow middle section.
Yeah.
I felt that things from there, they just needed to sort of not stop, and I needed a lot of activity, a lot of motion, and I wanted also a sense of passing the activity from one instrument to the other. So I wanted it to be very equal in that sense, that everybody gets a part of this kind of energy.
Yeah. Because the piece, in a sense, has this kind of introduction that even though technically when the everything gets going again, the tempo is the same, but it feels kind of slow because
Right.
everything's very broad, and then we have this middle section that is slow, and then it kind of gets going again. So it's basically in kind of three parts like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's very simple. The material that you hear at the opening, the clarinet melody, which is just, I think
Yeah.
that simple, just a note going up a note and then going down below the first note.
Yeah.
That's sort of the theme of the piece, and it's everywhere. I mean, that's pretty much the basis of every section of the piece. Really, when you come down to it, even the middle section, I would say.
Yeah. Well, what's also interesting is you're saying that everybody can play these very fast notes, but even in the beginning, the marimba and the clarinet are playing these, very quick, again, kind of like a canon thing where we're off two notes
That's
from each other playing the exact same thing. But and also all throughout the piece, there's a lot of moments where there's a lot of sustained notes over these very quick notes underneath that I think really makes a really
yeah.
interesting texture, because there's this really kind of lush melody going on under all this busyness, in it as well. Yeah. So,
That's sort of a, well. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go, please. Yeah.
That's something that's continually interesting to me. The idea of a music that feels very slow,
Right.
and where the pace is very slow, but then there's all this stuff happening underneath it. I'm not sure where you get everything from somewhere.
Uh huh.
Maybe it's Steve Reich. No, maybe it's like there's a sense of that happening in Baroque music, and some Bach and Mozart, I think. And John Adams, I would say, there's in some of his, well, certainly there's a sense of a slow harmonic rhythm,
Yeah.
with a lot of activity on the surface of it. But I also like like you said, a melodic line that's also contrary to the quickness of a lot of the other activity, a lot of the other texture that's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, you also do a lot of stuff, at least especially in the beginning, where the beat is being kind of displaced as far as like what the clarinet and marimba are playing, and that and just so for a listener, it's you kind of are feeling like you're just in this huge like wave of this texture versus like kind of steady beats or something like that. I mean, is that something that
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I don't want it to get, yeah, I know what you mean at the opening. It's like letter B, I think, where
Yeah.
things start to, um, I never want the audience to feel absolutely, complacent or, like this, there's such expectation and that, it becomes mundane,
Right.
so I like that kind of, just sort of keeping the audience off balance slightly as far as what might happen rhythmically, where the beat might be, um, especially in a section like that. I know exactly where you mean. It's very difficult to play, though. I think to put together.
Yeah.
I
Well,
know
that's
that
a.
that section in particular is difficult.
Uh,
In fact, that's interesting that you mentioned that part where the violin is playing melodies. Is that right?
yeah.
Yeah, it starts out that way. There's a sort of sweep that happens, I think at letter A,
Yeah.
and then the violin plays these long melodies, while the clarinet and marimba play the same 16th note pattern in canon.
Yeah.
And originally that canon was where the clarinet would play first and the
Right.
marimba would play an eighth note later.